Hi, it's Jen Richler. Welcome back to Can We Talk, the podcast of the Jewish Women's Arc. Actually, for this episode, I'm going with a different greeting. Are you there, Can We Talk listeners? It's me, Jen Richler. Obviously, that's a nod to Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, Judy Blume's best-known novel. Judy Blume is beloved by generations of readers for her novels about kids and teens navigating everyday problems, sibling rivalry, complicated friendships, divorce. She wrote from the point of view of young people in a way that made them feel understood.
Hi, I'm Jordan. I'm 43 years old, and I live in Boston. I'm not sure I would have survived my childhood or my tween and teen years without Judy Blume. Her books were basically my comfort objects. I would fall asleep with them under the covers and reread them when I was homesick from school. I think I even brought Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret to synagogue and read it in the pews on Shabbat morning. I was constantly understanding the world and understanding myself through the lens of a Judy Blume book. She just helped me access my feelings and inhabit my life in a way that was so unique and so powerful. And I never felt that with any other author.
Another thing that set Judy Blume apart was that her characters talked about periods, masturbation, and sex, topics that were considered taboo when she started writing about them in the early 70s. It might feel less shocking to read about those subjects in middle grade novels today, thanks in large part to Judy Blume. But the fact that she remains one of the most frequently banned authors in the U.S. shows those taboos are still with us. Despite her iconic status and a career that spans more than 5 decades, Judy Blume hasn't had a major biography until recently. In this episode of Can We Talk, Judith Rosenbaum talks with the author of that biography, Mark Oppenheimer, about how Judy's career was shaped by when she came of age and what's Jewish about her work. Mark also explains why he thinks Judy's books are radical in ways people often overlook. And of course, he and Judith share which books are their favorites and why. Throughout the episode, you'll also hear from listeners about what Judy Blume's books mean to them.
Hi, this is Julia Zuckerman. I'm 47 years old. I live in Washington, D.C., and I grew up in Los Angeles, California. The Judy Blume books, I must have read all of them dozens of times. I still have copies at my parents' house, and they're like, the cover is ripped, pages are missing. They were like Bibles for me growing up. And I just am so thankful that Judy Blume created these masterpieces that really pulled me through those years.
Hi, I'm Brenda, and I'm 52 years old. Judy Blume is one of my favorite authors. She's just been an incredible presence in my life. I've read her books from when I was a kid, and I continued as an adult. She's just highly entertaining, so relatable, regardless of whether I was a child or an adult reading. It was just always an easy read, an enjoyable read. It's a spot of comfort for me to read her books. Her writing was just so intelligent. It was so respectful of kids, so funny, and I'm just really glad that my daughter is reading her books now as well, and I plan on exposing my youngest daughter, who's 7, to those books as well, and just really continuing the indoctrination into the wonder that is Judy Blume.
Mark Oppenheimer loved Judy Blume's novels as a kid growing up in the 80s near Springfield, Massachusetts. Now he's a journalist and the author of several nonfiction books, and he'd wanted to write Blume's biography for years. Starting in 2022, he spent a couple of years interviewing her and many others in her circle. He also drew on notes she gave him for a memoir she never ended up writing. Here's his conversation with Judith.
I'd love to hear a little bit about your relationship with Judy Blume first as a reader. Yeah, so one of the things I always point out is that although I'm a writer now, I was not a particularly voracious reader as a kid. I was a reader, but I was a reader among other things. And I didn't like sci-fi or fantasy, which is all they give boys who, who are a little bit interested in reading or whom they want to get interested in reading, is they just give you Lord of the Rings or, Isaac Asimov, or it's always robots or elves. And I'm interested in neither robots nor elves. And so none of those books did it for me. And at some point I discovered Judy Blume, and it was what I now realize should be called realism for young people. And there just wasn't a lot. So Judy Blume was what there was. And once I discovered her, probably through Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, but maybe then again, maybe I won't, I acquired 6 or 7 of her books and just reread them all for a couple years. It was all I read. Her characters felt like friends to me. They felt like people I knew and liked and wanted to hang out with. Her characters felt very close to me.
What was your favorite Blume book as a kid, and did that change as you revisited them for this project?
I think that I reread Margaret and Then Again, Maybe I Won't probably equally. I probably have those more memorized than any of the others. But somewhere late in the 2 or 3 years of my Blume reader obsession, I started reading Starring Sally J. Friedman as herself, and I'm very convinced now that's her best book. Mm-hmm. And I think if people are to read one of her books, it should either be one of the comedies, so like Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing, or it should be Starring Sally J. Friedman as herself, which I think is a more complex and interesting and fully realized book than any of her others.
That one is, I think, my favorite also. And I think it appealed to me as a kid because it was more Jewish and also historical, which I was always drawn to. But I actually reread it when I was reading your book, and I was a little worried almost about, like, am I not going to like it as much? But I loved it, and I think I saw new things in it that I didn't understand about kind of historical context at the time.
Yeah, it is historical. It's also the only one of her books that is about a girl of the age that Judy is. That is to say, it's about a 10-year-old in 1948, and Judy was a 10-year-old in 1948. Her other books about young people, sometimes they draw on certain episodes from her past here and there, but they're about young people her children's age. They're about children in the 70s, not children in the 40s. So I think it has a special poignancy to it that really comes through in the writing, that it is highly autobiographical, and it's about this lost world that she's telling us about. It's historical fiction, and it's a very sort of sweet, nostalgic, but also somewhat sharp-edged post-Holocaust, post-war America that was already in the distant past by the time she was writing it.
I caught in one of your articles that, a friend had said to you, Mark, you're amazing, but you should not be the person to write about Blume. It should be a woman who writes about that. Did you have any hesitation or concern or pushback from others, other than this friend, about being a man writing this book?
No. If I'd had any such concern, it would have been allayed by the fact that Judy asked me to write it.
Right.
Or she, said I would be happy to cooperate by giving interviews. I also just philosophically, I'm perfectly happy to say that I think that sort of ghettoization of artists and subject is just wrong. No writer wants to only be read by people of their own identity. It would not be good for Judy or literature or women's voices if the entire fan base were female and the only people interested in writing about her were female. I mean, I want Gentiles to be interested in Jewish history.
Right, exactly. I mean, and there's just the whole intersectionality question of, like, there are ways in which you are like her and ways in which you are not, and
there always are.
And there will be hopefully many books about Judy, and someone with a different identity will write the next one.
I'm Aviv Rosenbaum. I'm 19 years old. I'm Judith Rosenbaum's favorite son. Something that I, really appreciate about the Judy Blume books is that when I was a younger kid, more of a little kid, I didn't always love reading. But whenever we'd go on family trips or on specifically long car rides, we'd always listen to the Judy Blume books. I remember listening to Super Fudge for the very first time on our way going to Chatham as a family on the high holidays, and me specifically fell in love with that book. It made me really realize that reading can be fun. There can be fun books that are entertaining. And now as an older kid, who really does enjoy to read, I look back on those experiences of those first more children books that I read and have a deep appreciation for them.
So how did you approach this project? And how did you think about the relationship between Judy the writer and Judy the person? Because a biography is kind of getting at both the figure and the work.
Yeah, well, I mean, I was very mindful of the era that she was in. Judy was born in 1938. I mean, she remembers when World War II ended. She remembers being on the beach in New Jersey and hearing that there was victory in Europe. I mean, she was barely a child of the 50s. She was a child of the 40s. Mm-hmm. And so what that means for her as a woman and a writer is that she was expected to find a husband while she was still in college. And she did. And she got married right before her senior year. And, she had 2 children by the time she was 25. And so she missed, by the time the second wave feminism was really afoot and by the time the counterculture was there, she was a mom of elementary school kids. She'd missed it all. And so that periodization was really, I think, is so much the key to who she was and to what she went through. Where if she'd been born even 5 or 6 years later, it would have looked pretty different. Perhaps in the way that because she might have been oriented toward a career and been good at it, she wouldn't have had to find writing.
Right, exactly. And it was interesting to me as I was reading it to realize that even though she is significantly younger than like Betty Friedan, for example, she in many ways became a writer to escape the problem that has no name of just sort of living in the suburbs, feeling like she was smart but didn't have anything really to do with her time, especially once her kids went to school.
Hi, I'm Eden and I'm 10 years old. My favorite book by Judy Blume is Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. It's a really good story about friendship and collaboration. I really like how there's a lot of drama and a really good plot twist when Margaret finds out Nancy actually doesn't have her period. I also really like the ending because Nancy and Margaret make up and Margaret gets her period.
There's this kind of interesting dynamic that you write about where we often think of Judy and Judy's work as maybe more radical than it is because it has been banned so frequently and continues to be so. But in some ways, as you say, she's not super political. She's dealing with pretty mainstream things. Like she's kind of put in this category that you challenge of kind of problem books, but actually she's dealing with like the problems of everyday life, not like big social crises, except for her first book, which talks about integration of housing. But her characters are mostly white, straight, middle class or upper middle class, and just kind of coming of age problems. But I'm curious how you think about, sort of understand her relationship to convention and controversy.
An insight that I think I had that I had not read before was that the quote unquote problems she was dealing with were actually things that happen to all of humanity and therefore aren't problems. Like if menstruation's a problem, masturbation and menstruation are basically as common things as there are. So they really are categorically different from the stuff S.E. Hinton is dealing with in The Outsiders, which is, juvenile delinquency, gang warfare in schools. Like that's a problem. That's actually something that, in an ideal world, you want to stamp out and theoretically could, and that mark certain people as having different upbringings from other people. Menstruation is utterly, the great commonality of women. So
sure, though I will say in the 70s, it still wasn't. I mean, like you have this, what I thought was a really great insight, which is you sort of talk about Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, as kin to Our Bodies, Ourselves. They come out at basically the same time. And of course, Our Bodies, Ourselves, again, like talks about things that now feel like this is basic. Every girl should have this book. Every woman should have this book. These things are talked about. Still not women's health is not given enough priority. But at the time, it was completely radical to think that women could actually talk about these experiences. So in some ways, I think we see those things as more normalized now than they would have been at the time.
It's in part, it's a tribute to her popularity, but also to the fact that she seemed to move kids. Forever was actually read and passed around. And I was talking to someone at a reading the other night who said, we had a copy in the girls' bathroom at school that was stored on like a ledge. And when you went to the bathroom, you could, if sitting on the toilet, you could take it down and read a couple of pages, but you had to put it back because it was the communal copy. I mean, that's crazy.
I remember it being passed around at sleepovers and, dramatic readings of various scenes.
And of course, the amazing thing about Forever is that it's showing sex as functional, not dysfunctional. I mean, the radicalism of Forever is that it's 2 high school seniors having consensual sex, figuring out how to make it pleasurable for both of them, having a good time, and then breaking up in the natural order of things when they leave for college and still liking each other afterwards.
Right. And nothing terrible happens to them. Nobody gets it pregnant or dies or is
no
punished
STDs.
Right.
No one dies. No one has enormous shame afterwards. No one thinks they're going to hell. No one's charred as a slut. It's just like two high school seniors in the 70s who have intercourse like a few times and then take leave of each other. And it goes to her point that she wasn't looking to write problem literature. She was looking to write literature with characters who did stuff. And when she thought back to what characters did in her childhood and talked to her children about what they did, she came up with the stuff of life.
This is Julia again. I'd also like to shout out Blubber, which really delved into social dynamics, bullying, fat shaming. We didn't have the word for that, or at least I didn't at that time, but that's what it was about. And that book also resonated deeply with me as an adolescent trying to navigate the various social dynamics that had come up.
It's very clear she had a significant feminist impact in terms of just like taking the lives of girls and women seriously and taking the lives of young people seriously and what their concerns were and in a kind of personalist political way. Does she think of herself as a feminist writer?
Oh, definitely. I mean, Judy definitely thinks of herself as a feminist. She talks about how thwarted she was by the codes of silence in suburban Jersey, how you didn't talk about your anxieties, your nervousness, your pain, your suffering, your loneliness around the pool at Shackamax and Country Club, that she had these women who were supposedly her friends, but they didn't know each other. They didn't share with each other. So she felt very alone. The problems in her marriage, she didn't feel she could share with anyone, and she didn't feel she could seek therapy. So when feminism came, and she said it came late to Scotch Plains, New Jersey, but when it came, in sort of little whispers here and there, and some women leaving their marriages, some women getting jobs, and then Ms. Magazine arriving, which, as you know, was initially an insert in New York Magazine. And so if you subscribed to New York, which was a fashionable thing to subscribe to if you were in the suburbs, one day a special issue arrived called Ms., and it came through your door slot, and she said it was very much like the whole magazine was a click moment for her. She read it and was like blown away. Now, she was already writing children's literature, and she'd already basically drafted and maybe even had accepted Iggy's House, which was about racial integration and was kind of inspired by the Newark riots 20 miles from where she lived. So, she was already a conscious writer, but feminism definitely impacted her.
The book starring Sally J. Friedman as herself resonated with me in its portrayal of a post-Holocaust, Jewish life in America. I think it told a story that maybe I was looking for, more information about, that I didn't really get from my parents. And I remember being fascinated in particular by the fact that Sally thought that this retiree in Florida was actually Hitler undercover.
This is Jordan again. If I had to choose a favorite, it would probably be a toss-up between starring Sally J. Friedman as herself and Just as Long as We're Together. I did not have many Jewish friends growing up, and there weren't many Jews in my school. So the Jewish themes, some subtle, some less subtle in these books, and the Jewish characters really resonated and helped me feel less alone.
What do you see as specifically Jewish about Judy's work or her characters or her own sense of self?
That's really interesting. And I want to back up here and say that, one of the critiques of her that I talk about in my book was that her characters were too, what we would now call normie, that the protagonists are never outsiders. The protagonists are popular girls. Blubber's not the star of Blubber. The star of Blubber is the girl trying to figure out whether or not she can stand up for the bullied girl who was being called Blubber. The star of Blubber is presumably thin. So there was this kind of critique, and there was another critique in one feminist journal at the time that her characters were not even that smart or curious or bookish. They weren't brainy. And it is true that her characters almost never read which is interesting because Judy read. So I always want to make the point that, and this ties into the Jewishness a bit, that the really wonderful thing about Margaret is not that she discusses breast development or menstruation, but that the whole book is structured around a spiritual quest to figure out, as a child of interfaith marriage, and by the way, I think maybe the first child of interfaith marriage in American young people's literature, what she is. Is she Jewish? Is she Christian?
And that's the way she's not normie, because
right.
She certainly feels other because of it.
She feels othered. And right, the othering is not that she has her period or that, you know, she and her girlfriends are trying to figure out how to make their breasts grow. The othering is that she's the Jew in a suburb that doesn't appear to have many Jews. And she's been moved away from her New York Jewish grandma, who's such an important influence, and was in Manhattan where they lived. She comes home from summer camp, discovers the parents are moving her to the country. So that's really interesting. And I think, you know, it is a profoundly interesting book for people interested in children's spirituality, as is Sally J. Friedman, which is about a character coming to terms with America in the aftermath of the destruction of European Jewry, you know, a world in which the cousins who you hadn't heard from, you finally realized you're not going to hear from. Like within a couple of years, it slowly becomes clearer and clearer.
My name is Clara. I'm 15 years old. My favorite Judy Blume book is definitely Storing Sally J. Friedman as Herself. I could reread it every month. I love it because there's not really a central conflict of the story. It's not like Deanie with her scoliosis or Blubber about bullying. It's just sort of the story of an imaginative kid who makes up stories in her head. And I was an imaginative kid who made up stories in her head. And so I think the story really spoke to me. And Sally's also a younger character than Judy often writes about, because a lot of her books are about adolescence, so more like 12 or 13, and Sally's about 9 or 10. And I just think the sort of nostalgia for the imagination of that time of childhood is really beautiful. And I really love revisiting that when I reread Sally J.
I was interested in your coverage of her adult work and sort of thinking about her ambivalence about writing in that space. I'm sure there are a lot of ways in which when you're very successful as a children's author, people want you to stay in your lane and,
totally.
You know.
Yeah, there was no one pushing her to do the adult books, except that Wifey did sell incredibly well. I mean, Wifey is in places not that good and in places overwrought, and, you know, it's derivative. She's trying to do something like Erica Jong's Fear of Flying. But Wifey also is in a few places incredibly incisive, and really made you think that if she'd worked more on her adult fiction, which I think got better book by book. I think In the Unlikely Event, her last adult novel, is a pretty well-realized novel, that she could have been great in that genre as well.
Hi, my name is Dee Dee, and I'm 68 years old and live in the Midwest. I think the book that still haunts me today is In the Unlikely Event. The book takes place in the early 1950s and describes 3 airplane crashes which happened in the span of a few months in Elizabeth, New Jersey. I still remember the description of one of the crashes with a mother and daughter on the plane and a stewardess trying desperately to reassure them that it would be all right, knowing inside that nothing was going to be okay and they were going to crash and probably all die. It's an amazing book, and I still remember that one scene 10 years later.
How do you think that she will be, or maybe should be, remembered 50 years from now? Do you think her popularity will endure?
I think Judy will be read, and I think the books that will be read will be the comedies. Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing, Fudge, Sheila, otherwise known as Sheila the Great. They're just very funny, and I don't know that anyone is as funny as she is to this day. Like reading those aloud to kids, everyone ends up on the floor giggling. And I think that she's underappreciated as a comic writer. But I'm hopeful that I think that Margaret still has a lot of power, even though menstruation is not the taboo conversation that it once was.
So many different generations at this point have read and looked up to Judy Blume. And actually, for me, one of the joys of parenting was getting to discover that she'd written a whole bunch more books since my own childhood that I didn't know about. So getting to revisit, Peter Hatcher and Fudge through Fudgemania and Double Fudge, and getting to know the pain and the great one and things that had not been part of my own childhood experience of Judy, but getting to experience those again. But then, of course, with that kind of accretion of multiple generations of ideas about someone, what their legacy is can be fixed or misunderstood. And you have this great place in your book where you write about some of the more recent adoration of Judy Blume by folks like Lena Dunham. You said, quote, "While complimentary, this drumbeat of exaltation could draw attention away from the complexity of Judy's work. It made her both bigger and smaller, as if she belonged on a postage stamp rather than on a bookshelf." What do you think about Judy Blume, the conventional wisdom / fandom gets wrong?
I think that she's probably perceived as a more radical figure than she was. I think that, radicalism, like, I don't even know what it means as a term. It sounds good, but also bad. It depends who's saying it. Like, great writers, I actually think she's great. I think that she has a writer's voice that cuts right to you. Like, with the opening page of Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, when it begins with that italicized interior monologue, which is a prayer, where she's saying, "Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret." Like, we say it so many times we forget what it is. It's a girl, like, lying in bed or sitting in bed or kneeling. I forget how, if we know. And she's saying, "Are you there? God, it's me, Margaret." Like, is anyone listening?
Right.
Because I have nobody to talk to.
Yeah, I think it's very intimate and yet also like, I don't know if you know me.
Yeah, it's like I'm trying to forge a connection. I've never been religious, but I'm going to try forging a connection with God. It's incredibly powerful. And, once it's done, you can say, well, it's obvious. But of course, that's the thing about geniuses, is they do something that in retrospect looks obvious, right? It's not highly complex. What's great about her is simply that she's great, that she has a great writer's voice that was honed over a lot of practice and a lot of failure and a lot of rejection slips, and that she finally, particularly on her third book, Margaret, nailed it and then had it. So in a way, to treat her as somebody who was pushing a political agenda is to demean her. It's not what she was doing. And you know what? Like, there were a lot of people writing at the time in a political register who might have been powerful thinkers and changed the world in important ways, but their prose often sucked. And Judy's prose didn't suck. Judy's prose was, like, utterly captivating. There are definitely people who I think want her to be some sort of avant-garde, like, activist around these things. But that's not literature. And so I think that, to go back and read the books is actually to discover they were radical and powerful in ways you forgot that they were, about interfaith marriages, about suburbanization, about mental illness, like the fact that Tony Miglione has these somaticized stomach pains. Mm-hmm. Nobody was writing about stomach pains as potentially the offshoot of anxiety in 1972. Like that idea that if you had stomach pains, maybe what you needed was to talk to a counselor for an adolescent boy in 1972. That was insanely radical. So people are kind of missing her for who she was by trying to make her into something else.
We'll end with this vivid story of discovering Judy Blume from a listener named Leslie.
My cousin Michelle and I were at a sleepover at Maya's house. Maya was deep in a book in her pink room. She looked up, smiling at us, and I turned the book in her hands to see the cover. She folded down the corner of her page and let me hold the book, a paperback, borrowed from her private Hebrew school, Solomon Schechter. I opened it to the first page and read the opening paragraph. Michelle reading over my shoulder. I turned the page and continued to read. Maya wanted her book back, but I had an idea. The three of us would take turns reading chapters, and Maya was game. We hardly left her room that night, her mom bringing us snacks. Deep into the night, we took turns reading. My mom picked us up after breakfast. We left the Tudor house on the curving street, each of us having finished that one book, giggling and singing, we must increase our bust, and promising to tell each other immediately once one of us got our periods. After that, every book that Judy Blume wrote, I was the first one to get to the library or the local bookstore in my Queens neighborhood to get my very own copy.
Thanks to Mark Oppenheimer, whose new biography is Judy Blume, A Life. Thanks also to Jordan, Julia, Brenda, Aviv, Eden, Clara, Dee Dee, and Leslie for sharing their Judy Blume appreciations. For more on Judy Blume, check out our 2020 episode called Coming of Age with Judy Blume, where Judith and Nahani talk with their daughters Maayan and Shalva about the novel Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. You can also read about Judy Blume's life and work in the Shalvi Hyman Encyclopedia of Jewish Women at jwa.org. Thank you for listening to Can We Talk, the podcast of the Jewish Women's Archive. Our team includes Nahani Rouse and Judith Rosenbaum. Our theme music is by Girls in Trouble. You also heard Game Hens from Blue Dot Sessions. You can find Can We Talk at jwa.org/canwetalk or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, I'm Jen Richler.